Chuck, it's great to see you today.
Hi, Jason. Talking to you from beautiful Ukraine.
Yes, in fact, you are in Ukraine, and we were just together just a few days ago in Odessa, Ukraine. So you've been traveling around the country yourself, and you've seen a lot of what's happening. And now you've been able to judge with your own eyes. Are the Russians making gains? Are the Russians winning, like we hear all the time in Russian press, as well as in the US press? Or what's been your interpretation?
Well, Jason, when we departed in Odessa, uh, my partner Alan Brewer and I and our producer Rostic, we made a giant counterclockwise move around the entire country following the zero line. So we were in Donetsk, we were in Pavlohard during a Russian airstrike. We were in Kupyansk. We were in Kramatorsk. We were in Druzhka. We swung up towards Sumy and, of course, back to Kiev. Despite the almost constant background of air raid alarms, in Ukraine, you will find beautiful, clean, functional cities that are full of citizens that are absolutely undefeated, uncowed, and the majesty with which they go about their daily lives, living normal lives in a Europe centric, democratically ordered country. It's amazing because 10 kilometers to the east of them is hell, and they are holding the line.
That's phenomenal. So they recently had a summer offensive, though, and the Russians had promised massive gains. Did you see some of those massive gains?
We spent some time around the center of gravity of the Russian offensive, which is the city of Pokrovsk. I did a piece for the Kiev Post while I was here, drilled into Russia's summer offensive by the numbers. So we can hit those just really briefly. This summer, since May, Russia has lost 210,000 soldiers. Okay. That's against the background of them losing somewhere between 900,000 and 1.3 million since they invaded. Okay. Those are pretty bad. Just this summer, they've lost 1,200 tanks, 2,100 armored vehicles, and 7,300 pieces of artillery. Now that just sounds like, I don't know, I'm in a junkyard describing things. So let's put it in military terms. This summer alone, they lost the equivalent of 525 battalions of men, 14 full divisions of infantry. So those of you who are Civil War buffs remember how many people are in a division. A division is people as far as you can see to the horizon. Okay, their tank losses are the equivalent of 34 tank divisions or 4 or 5 armored divisions. The United States has 1 armored division. They lost 5 times the number of armor than the United States even has. Okay, this is just this summer. This is just this summer. The mechanized forces, they lost 6 mechanized divisions. So this summer, the Russians have lost more infantry than is owned by Germany, the UK, and France, the big 3 NATO European powers. It has been an egregious defeat. And I'll just conclude by focusing in on Pokrovsk. With great fanfare and hand-wringing from mill bloggers all over the world, 150,000 Russians were going to take Pokrovsk. 89,000 of them are dead today. They have suffered, out of that 150,000, 70% casualties. If you lose 20% in a US Army unit, you are withdrawn because you are considered to have been defeated. So how's the summer offensive going?
It sounds like it's going just great, just like the rest of the war so far. Why is it though? What do the Russians see in this? What do they have hopes for? Because right now they're planning now an autumn offensive. We've heard that they are now gathering troops around and getting ready to start invading other locations. I'm guessing you're not feeling very optimistic of how that will turn out either.
No, I'm not. We're hearing now, and when we were close to the front, the information seems to be that another 150,000 troops may be deployed to Pokrovsk. Uh, really? How'd you like to get those orders? 89,000 of them, and this is Jason just in the Pokrovsk area of operation. 89,000. You know, I don't like to report gory stories, but there is a TO 515 highway. It goes north and south, and it goes into Pokrovsk. And we saw drone footage of a drone flying over this road, and there was a dead Russian soldier on the road every 20 meters, which tells me, in terms of the relationship of an attack, this just shows the Russians keep attacking on the same vector, the same place, the same road every day, and they're amazed when the outcome is always the same.
So, what is the plan now? How do the Russians think that they will be able to get through? And when you're talking to the Ukrainians, what do you notice about what they're saying? How they view the situation on the front, and how that's probably different from how the Russians view their current situation.
A Russian commander does not count his casualties. A Western commander will sweat over every one of them. But for a Russian, his troops, and let me just say people, because they're not troops. They show up with zero training. They're handed a rifle. They're sent to the front with no combat training. And the Russians are still losing between 48 and 84% of their troops every single time they go into contact, whether it's a squad size unit, a company sized unit, a platoon. Uh, the Russians know, to our Russian listening guests, when they try to do something bigger, as they did in Vuhledar, they lost almost 200 armored vehicles in one afternoon. They tried a 2 battalion attack in Kupyansk recently. Uh, they lost 2 battalions in, wow, 30 minutes. They were engaged by HIMARS. 2 battalions annihilated. And again, their tactics are bad. They massed these forces, they kept them together, which was great in World War II, but it doesn't work when you've got an adversary with drones in the air and HIMARS in the tube. So I think one of the fundamental breakdowns is Russia has not come to grips with appropriate tactics to deal with a flexible, mobile, opportunistic Ukrainian defenders. And that's the short answer. You could write a book on what is happening, but the short answer is if you get to someplace on a battlefield and you get there first, you have an advantage. And it usually takes 3 or 4 guys to move you. And the Russians are discovering that sometimes it takes 20, 30, 40, or 50 guys to move one Ukrainian.
So, now that you're there in Ukraine, and you've talked with a lot of folks. Tell me, the role of drones. Have we talked about it too much or too little, or is it realistic? It is actually a game changer in this war.
Absolutely. You know, it's literally gone from the Bayraktar drone, which was a larger drone that fired smaller missiles, and the Bayraktar is essentially obsolete now in this war, and it's been replaced by thousands of first-person drones that can range anywhere from a couple of kilometers to literally 40 and 50 kilometers, unjammable drones trailing fiber optic cables. But what that means, it used to be the forward edge of the battlefield used to be considered a line and maybe 600 meters on either side of it, which was essentially rifle range. But now you've got the zero line and 20 kilometers on either side of it. Uh, you can be hit by drones. For example, we were north of Kharkiv with a demining company. We were in proximity to the zero line. We weren't hit, but in Kharkiv, the next oblast over, that demining team was struck, not by a drone, but in fact, to show the viciousness of the Russians, they were hit with a Iskander missile. Uh, so What was the forward edge of the battle area? It's in this war, it's orders of magnitude broader
Hmm.
than it ever was.
Hmm. So, when you've talked to the Ukrainian troops themselves and they're looking at the situation, they're looking at what's going on, do you sense optimism or fear, or do you think that things are going to get worse? Or do you get a sense that they're not very worried about the Russian offensive? Of course, they're concerned, and they always should be, but they're not panicking. They seem in order. Because that's been my experience, but maybe you've had a different one.
No, not at all. In fact, what I got every time I spoke to a soldier was this quiet confidence, not just grim determination, but they were confident. And I'll also comment on the quality of the average private soldier. I spoke to two guys in a reconnaissance element. They were both university educated. They both had master's degrees, and they were serving as private soldiers, privates in the army. They were intelligent. They knew what was going on. They knew what the war was about. They knew their business in war fighting. You just couldn't be anything but impressed with these guys. You just you just you just couldn't. And the camaraderie, of course, the unit cohesion, the morale, as a small unit guy, that's everything to me. I needed a happy, cohesive, integrated, functioning unit to do the stuff we did. It's the same thing in any platoon or rifle squad. And all I saw were indications of determined, motivated, patriotic troops everywhere I went.
So, very good. Going ahead, though, if the Russians aren't making any advances, we don't see them taking any massive cities, they're not taking swaths of land, and they are actually getting pushed back in many locations now. The situation for the Russians is looking pretty complicated. It's not looking very good. What is the strategy? How do they think they're going to pull through? How will they seize Kiev? And now, part two of the same question, there's also talk that they are going to make a move for the city that we're just in, Odessa and Mykolaiv. How realistic do you think that is?
I think it's absolutely unrealistic. It is an absolute fairy tale. They don't seem to be capable of conducting large scale combined arms ground maneuver warfare in the manner of World War II. Uh, for example, a little village on the south bank of Kherson, there were 300 Ukrainian defenders there. An entire Russian VDV parachute division failed to dislodge them for 70 days. So if I told American listening audiences that I sent the 101st Airborne to take a village on the bank of the Euphrates River and they were defeated by 300 jihadis for 60 days, I'd say turn in your parachutes, boys. The Russians can't seem to pull that stuff off. They just can't do it. But what is alarming to me, and you and I have reported on this numerous times, the widening use of chemical weapons by Russians. We interviewed a battlefield surgeon who told us, look, these aren't just riot agents. They're not just coming away with, runny noses and crying. That Ukrainian soldiers are dying from the sorts of chemical weapons that the Russians use almost daily. Attention, OPCW, okay? Attention, United Nations. So I think we'll see more desperation like that on the part of the Russians. And I'm afraid we're going to see, uh, as you know, large background of air raids, which happen at every day in every major city.
Well, tell me about that. How have you noticed air raids to be? How have you noticed the people and the reaction in different parts of the country that you've been in? What's it been like?
Well, an air raid will go off and you can hear the sirens. Some people look at their phone, some people don't, some people just keep going. Most people just keep going. And then, as you know very well, and then there are some other signals. If you start to hear anti-aircraft fire, if you start to hear some other signals, then it is prudent to take cover. But what is amazing, and you've seen it too, there is never any panic. There is never any scurrying. An older woman carrying her groceries she won't really necessarily even speed up. These people are determined. They are, you know, someone asked me, uh, now that you're in Ukraine, what has changed? What has changed about what you think about the war? And I answered, well, nothing. I knew the Ukrainian people were determined. I knew this was a beautiful country, and it is a magnificent country. I said all those things, but at night in bed, an air raid went off, and I thought of all the things I'd seen in Ukraine, and it hit me. I didn't know before, but I know now what the Russians want. They want this beautiful country. They want these brave
Hmm.
people. They want this industry. They want the whole enchilada. And if they can't get it, they're willing to destroy it. That's what I learned on this trip.
That is absolutely right. Chuck, great talking with you.
Always, Jason, travel safe. I'll see you soon.
See you soon.